the subcommittee of the local development framework. I'll open by talking about the evacuation procedure. We're not expecting any drills tonight, so if there is one, then it's real. You'll all be aware that there's two exits, one to the rear of the chamber and the other the way you come in. Forming up point is in the car park. Just form up there. Please wait until the responsible officer has counted you and tells you to go. Otherwise, we end up sending firemen into the burning building because we think people are in it. And if you've just gone home, then they're not very happy about that. So that is that. Apologies for absence. I've got one apology. Well, I've got two apologies. Councillor Dervick's was apologies. Councillor Hayden Phillips is his sub. Councillor Hobley, I believe, got some childcare issues, so can't make it, but it was the last minute. Councillor Osborne, has anyone heard? No? Okay. We will move on then. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on anything on tonight's agenda? Looking around. Okay, in your pack, you'll have the minutes of the local development framework subcommittee held on the 26th of February. Everyone had a chance to look at them. Are there any comments on those minutes? No, can't see any hands. Okay, I'll take those as an accurate record of the meeting. First point on tonight's agenda is a statement of community involvement. And I'll hand over to Justin.
Thank you. As you'll see, we updated this document back in 2024, and what we're bringing to you this evening is only some minor changes, really. The main one is on page 20 and 21 of 114 in your pack, which relates and just explains a bit more about the regulation 18 consultation, and just explains that it means the issues and options, paper or draft plan. When we were going through the regulations, we just felt that it just needed that clarification, and then there's just some of the additional words in there, and then it was just some minor other things that we've picked up on the way as well in terms of other parts of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on that report? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. Just to say, in general, review. If there is no requirement to do this, I'm not sure why. So is there a requirement to go through these changes?
It is a requirement to have a statement of community involvement, and it should be reviewed on a regular basis. And because hopefully, well, at the last meeting, we made the members made a decision to review the local plan. It was felt appropriate that we should just review it, just make sure that the wording complies with all the up-to-date guidance.
So, Chairman, I think the officer was saying that it is a requirement to review and to ensure that the changes comply with current legislation. Is that right?
Yeah.
And all the changes that are identified in here, changes simply to reflect current legislation.
There are some corrections, and then that one that I just pointed to about the regulation 18, it was for clarification to make sure that it did marry up with the regulations.
I'd like to be clear, Chair, whether these are requirements or optional. Because my reading of this is that we may be potentially consulting less. I don't see the good thing, unless that is a requirement. And that's what I would like clarification.
The way the government is going, it is looking to streamline the process of local plan making. So yes, they would have been a definite regulation 18 that we've done in the past on a draft plan. So that would be all the wording that you would expect to have seen in the next version of a plan. But The regulations now make it very clear that that can be the issues and options paper, and then you can go straight to a regulation 19 version of the full version of a plan. So yes, you're right that but what we're trying to do is just make it clear that there is the issues and options, and then it can go straight to a 19 version of a plan. But equally, we've also said in there that it may be that we do issues of options and then another draft plan, but they would still be regulation 18. It's just trying to make it very clear that issues and options can be a regulation 18, which I don't think has been clear enough in previous versions of the statement of community involvement. But in terms of plan making, we're still awaiting the new information on how the government's going to streamline and the system into a 30-month period from start to finish of reviewing a local plan.
So, given that, Chairman, is there a risk then that we'll do this now and then we'll have to do it again?
Oh, we may do at some stage, because every 5 years we should be reviewing it anyway. And particularly when you start a new plan, you should make sure that the statement of community involvement is as relevant and as up to date as it possibly can be, in line with whatever the regulations are at that moment in time.
So, Chairman, I think I understood some, at least, of that. And I don't know that really. I mean, it's a difficult, complicated area, and I'm always amazed that officers can follow all the changes that the government's doing. In the sense that I am absolutely in agreement that we should have documentation that matches the legislation. And I am absolutely in favour of anything which enables us to speed up the plan process. I think this is good. In the sense that we may be consulting less. I don't. And I'm, as a principle, uncomfortable. But I mean, you know, when we've the last, I think 2, maybe 3 borough plans that I've seen, this authority has gone out to rather more consultation than it was obliged to. And I get there are, you know, always time pressures and always concerns. So I don't want to prolong the issue longer than we need to. So going to an issues and options paper and then, well, have you all that seems sensible. But I think as a democratic organisation, we should be consulting as widely as it is reasonable.
And I agree with you. Just before I bring Councillor Hayfield, so can I just clarify that and it's alarming. I think it's alarming for every member, every elected member, when we talk about you know, policy being that we consult less and move things quicker. And also clarify though that but under the options paper, we will be given an opportunity at that point to challenge, to question, to kind of review what's going forward. Because it is a concern, and I do share Councillor Simpson's concern that as elected members, if we're being told that we don't need to consult as much, or we don't need to consult with our residents as much, I think that's just an alarming trend, to be honest. But Councillor Hayfield.
I'm looking for some sort of I understand something like this in terms of has to be all bells and whistles. You have to consider this, you have to consider that. In practice, people who outside people who get involved in the local plan are either ones that don't want us to do something that we're proposing to do, or want us to do something that we're not proposing to do. It's usually one or the other. So I don't really have a sense of just how involved the public and that list of various societies and things are actually in this. I can't imagine you're overwhelmed with responses from people. I mean, I take absolutely Mark's point that we need to make it as easy as possible for people who do want to comment. I'm just trying to get some perspective on how many currently actually do comment. Now, I'm not looking for figures, obviously. I'm just looking for a sort of pen picture of how busy people keep you in writing in. With an opinion on this, an opinion on that.
In terms of the consultations, these ones, the issues and options for the employment paper last year, we had 22 responses on that. I can't recall I don't think it's less for the essays. Yeah, the others were less, so that was the sustainability appraisal and the SCI looked at for consultation as well.
Manageable number.
That was, in terms of when we review the local plan, and as soon as you put site allocations into a document, so say for the employment plan that we have here, there are at least one site allocation, then that ups the number normally. Because as you will recall, when we produced the draft local plan, or the currently adopted local plan, there was over 2,000 representations just from Dordon. So there is, so the levels of it, so the levels of responses can be various, and it's, in my experience, it's often where people can see them being directly affected by a site allocation. That's when you get the most responses. And throughout at the time, we do drop-in sessions to as many settlements that we can for the whole of the local plan, even if there are site allocations or not. We do things on the website. I mean, we've talked through IT as well about in future ones whether we should be doing like a podcast and all the social media side of it all as well, because we often put things on social media to say here's the deadline, that the deadline's coming up, please be aware, here's how to consult to respond. So we are trying to look at different ways, and you're using things like QR codes and things like that. So we are trying to look at different ways to try and get to as many people as we possibly can get to. But yes, it tends to be those directly affected that will actively take part in a consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
So you very professionally just basically said, it's as long as a piece of string, as long as it's not a controversial piece of string.
I think you're absolutely right. I've just been told there could be had over 5,000 responses to theirs. So yeah, it is very much. I mean, we've tried in the past to try and be as accommodating as we possibly can in terms of any consultation events that we've done. I mean, we've gone to consultation events where three of us have been there and we've just not stopped. And other times there's perhaps two of us and not one person's arrived. So it depends as well on the location as well. So.
Thank you. Councillor Humphries.
Well, I was looking at, we don't really encourage it, do we? I was just looking at 3.3. While regular review and updates are encouraged to ensure effective management, there is no mandatory requirement for consultation on every change. Planning policy guidance state there is no requirement for local planning authorities to consult when reviewing and updating the statement of community involvement. Does that allow the council to do its own thing? It does say later that there's a significant change, but who declares or decides when it's significant if it's all being run by ourselves?
Well, we as officers are recommending that these are minor changes. If you yourselves feel that it should go out for consultation, then more than happy to do that. It could go out for consultation when we go out for consultation with other draft documents, or even which is options paper for the local plan or things like that. So it doesn't have to be that you approve it tonight if you don't feel that it should be. But there is that option if you feel that these changes are more than significant in how we feel they are, then please just say, and we'll happily do that.
Yeah, Chair, all I would say, it's like marking your own homework to a certain extent. I never got away with that when I was at school, but
It's school.
thank you.
Thank you, councillor Humphries. Any other questions?
More of a comment.
Councillor Simpson.
I'm not sure, Jim, that I see a much merit in consulting on these changes. But that I think is relatively straightforward. What I'm more bothered is that this is the policy that says how so and engage the community in the future. And all I'm really looking for is something which assures me that we are going to consult as widely as we have done in the past, where it is reasonable and appropriate to do so. I get the point that, you know, in advance, you sort of have a fair idea of the sort of areas which are likely to be contentious and those which are likely to be less contentious. I don't, you know, that's not infallible, but I think this authority has a very proud record of consultation, and I'd like to continue that, whether there's an obligation to do so or not. And what was concerning me was the reference there is no consult in certain areas. I think we should be making a decision based on what we feel is best, not what is the requirement. If that's what this document is doing, then I'm happy with it. But I don't want us to move too far from as wide an area of consultation as possible. You know, to my mind, if you get no responses, that doesn't mean it's bad consultation. It's a big, long, you know, broadly content. And I think that is something itself. So the fact that nobody turns up, it in some ways is a waste of time, but in other ways it's not, because you have actually given people the opportunity to do so. And that's what I'm seeking comfort on. The detail of it, you know, in a lot of respects, I'm happy to follow officers' guidance on, because that's what we should be doing. But it's just that principle of, are we doing what is right?
And I agree, but I think one of our challenges, as Dr. said, is actually, if you look at new government policy, it is trying to speed up the process and do the opposite of consulting more and consulting less. Now, as I say, elected members were probably not happy about that, but that's the policy, and that's certainly well, you know, Mr. Chair, planning better than I. That's certainly the direction of travel that we're seeing. As much as I think all we can do is continue to actually challenge, continue to bring these questions as elected members representing our residents, and continue asking the questions, which is why I think as long as there are stopgaps in there that says if we sign it off today, it's not a done deal and we'll never see it again. I think, yeah, and it meets the legislation, it meets the current requirements, then that's something that we have to have. So that in, oh, sorry.
I just like to agree with Councillor Simpson. I think this is relatively minor, and I think I agree with everything you say about oversight and about making sure that these things don't run away with us. But we are in this room, and we will always have our foot hovering over a brake. So what we agree here, and we trust our officers, and we have that good relationship with them. So I don't think there's. I agree with Councillor Simpson. I think there is a methodology there that's already in place. I think it will continue.
I'm grateful for that. I think we have common ground. The one area in this where I have significant misgiving is in neighbour notification, because I regularly have complaints from people who are what they would determine to be a neighbour of a site, and they don't get a notification. So I think neighbour notification is something that, whilst we can't necessarily address it here, I think we do need to look closely at how do we determine who is a neighbour and how do we consult. You know, I have an application that I'm aware of in my own street at the minute, and I know two neighbours have been notified and 3 who haven't, and they're all within the same number of feet or yards, meters, whatever it is, from the development side. So I don't think we necessarily have an exemplar as far as neighbour notification is concerned. And as we move forward to face the abolition, effectively, of local planning authorities in the sense of councils being engaged, neighbour notification will become even more important.
No, and I absolutely agree with that, and I think we've all got those stories of where we've had some neighbours who have received letters, some neighbours who haven't received letters. And I do think we need to keep our eye on the ball and focus on that to make sure that all neighbours, all those residents impacted are notified and given the opportunity to comment. Okay, any more comments or questions? And with that in mind, with respect to the recommendation, the subcommittee, and that is that the proposed changes to the statement of community involvement be approved and that the statement of community involvement be adopted. I have a proposer for that. I'm happy to propose from the chair. A seconder. Ain't gonna go anywhere without a seconder.
I'll second it.
Okay, seconds by councillor Owen Phillips. All those in favour? 3, 4. Against? Abstentions? So that's carried with 4. Okay. Okay, moving on. That was the easy one. Moving on, we now have the Coventry and Warwickshire Memorandum of Understanding. Oh, do you want to take us through this one, or was that you, Mike?
It's me this evening.
Okay.
Martin, thank you very much. Members will see the 2 attachments to this committee report. The first one is the latest memorandum of understanding. That's Coventry are seeking this to endorse and sign. If members recall, we did make response to the emerging Coventry local plan recently, and we did raise 1 or 2 issues. This memorandum of understanding won't affect, or it won't prevent any of those comments or issues being raised. As you can see in the report, majority of the memorandum of understanding does not raise any concerns, but we do have concerns over one of the main issues, unless you don't want to respond to that, which is the shortfall of 45 hectares referred to in the report in a plan. There isn't this case any shortfall in housing, which is welcomed, so we aren't faced, as we were in the previous local plan, with a housing shortfall. However, it is the issue of the 45 hectare shortfall. Now, the memorandum of understanding indicates that this will be addressed through negotiations and statements of common ground, which is why you have the draft statement of common ground as their draft example, to then go and be considered between individual authorities within the Warwickshire area. So effectively, from officers' point of view, we're happy to sign, or happy for this memorandum of understanding to be signed, but on the understanding that we still have and will still maintain those concerns in respect of the shortfall and in respect of the emerging Coventry local. More of a case of them having to indicate through the memorandum of understanding and the duty to cooperate to the inspector who will consider their plan that they haven't been addressing that process. So the statement of common ground, which is the final appendix, is very much a draft, and it's Coventry's draft. We have not yet been in a position to either discuss or consider it in terms of changes to wording. So please be aware that that wording is in no way ours. It is theirs, their initial draft before they approach it. And we thought members ought to be aware of the wording in the statement of ground so that you're aware of this meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks much. Before I invite questions, so will the other planning authorities surrounding Coventry also be adopting a memorandum of understanding? So the Bedworth Rugby, Warwick, etc.
Yes, they will. And all the authorities have been asked to sign. Some have already signed the memorandum of understanding, but there have been no agreements yet made that I'm aware of, or discussions yet made, which is very recent, in terms of the state of common ground. A number of authorities have already raised, along with Wrexham, is this issue of the 45 hectare shortfall. And Coventry are aware that that may well be a major issue and a major point of contention when they get to the local plan inquiry from their neighbours.
And just to, but the memorandum of understanding doesn't say we will fulfil or meet that 45 hectare shortfall, or anyone else will. It just means we'll consider it if we have any spare.
It's an outstanding issue. But that's really where it is. It is no further than that. It is Coventry saying we've addressed all the other issues, but we haven't dealt with this one. We're going to deal with it through the statements of common ground, which we will be progressing over the coming months. It remains an issue for them, and we will maintain it as an issue. And it is something that they will have to address when they get to the inquiry. So they will be trying to negotiate with the joint authorities. It may well be that some authorities, we've had conflicting, some authorities are like us, we're saying, hang on a minute, this was not coming, this is fairly new, this is a bit out of the blue, and we weren't expecting it. Others who have got significant more advance in their local plan or have had significant higher delivery or expectation of delivery are less concerned. So there is a bit of a two-sided within the authorities in Warwickshire, two-sided way they're looking at it. Some are fairly comfortable with it. That may well be because they do have the supply in employment land that could compensate. We've had it, for instance, at the previous local plan where we allowed the junction 8 hectares on the Tamworth side of the M42 to go to Tamworth needs because there was a shortfall in Tamworth at that time. Then we had sufficient to cover our own needs within the rest of the borough. That may well be the case with others. We're not in that position yet. As you know, we've gone through the employment development plan partly to address that issue. So that issue has to be discussed, negotiated, and agreed or disagreed. And that will be what we'll be doing over the next 6 to 8 months.
Thank you. But I'm comforted by your words. It is an issue for them.
It is.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chairman. A question first on my own before I talk. Aside from being good corporate citizens, what's in it for North Warwickshire?
It is part of the process that we need to, under the duty to cooperate, one, show how we've worked together. One, if issues that another local authority are highlighting that we should at least consider, because it's not a duty to agree, it's a duty of cooperation, that we should be at least considering what the situation is and being made aware of it. So it's one of those that it is part of the regulations legislation that we should be actively and proactively working with our neighbours. And that's the reason in new guidance, it actually does talk about the statement of common ground, exactly what that should cover. What we did previously, you will recall that in the last local plan, we had a Coventry and Warwickshire MOU that dealt with both housing, and then there was a separate MOU that dealt with employment, because there was a shortfall of both across the Coventry and Warwickshire area, and they were being addressed then. This MOU doesn't quite get to that conclusion as well. How is that 45 hectares going to be addressed? Whereas the previous MOUs did, it said there was a calculation way forward, whereas this isn't actually saying what that end solution is. And it's that end solution that, as Mike has said, we've already made an objection to, and so that stands, and that will be considered by their local plan inspector. But equally, this isn't saying, the MOU that's drafted isn't saying that we must or that we should. It's just merely highlighting that there is a shortfall of 45 hectares.
I get the generality, Chairman, that we have to show that we are talking and considering and being good corporate citizens. What I don't understand is how this document moves any of that along a centimetre or millimetre. We are doing that, and all that can be evidenced by the day-to-day consultation and discussion. My question is, how much further does this piece of paper move that process along? And in signing it, what does it do for us?
Chair, it doesn't do a great deal for us. It's predominantly for the purposes of the process for Coventry. It's Coventry City's basically document that they will present to the inspector to help evidence then that they have addressed the duty to cooperate. It does leave them absolutely categorically in a slightly awkward situation. Our experience, and this has been expressed to them, and they are aware of it, that when we were in this position in, I think it was 2014 or 2014, we were dealing with Warwick and Warwick's local. And we had attended the initial hearings of the inquiry. And so the inspector, as we are in the room here, was facing us. It wasn't just Warwick DC they were facing, we had all turned up with similar memorandum of understanding to this one, saying that, yes, there's a housing shortfall, but we will deal with it through negotiations and through further discussions. And the inspector quite clearly said, unfortunately, until I know where that shortfall is going to be addressed and how it will be divided between the adjoining involved authorities and the cooperate, I cannot find this local plan sound, and I instruct you as a group of authorities to go away, negotiate and agree where land will go, or the shortfall. That is the concern that we've raised with Coventry, and you've said that categorically. So they are aware of it. They are hoping that the current situation means that they can, without being too flippant, pick it into the long grass a little bit. And this provides sufficient for them to get through the first stages of the local. I think they're relying on some of the delivery in Warwick, Stratford and the South Warwickshire local plan and through the new Rugby emerging plan to address this shortfall, which it may well do. But until we have the evidence, and this is where ourselves has raised the issue, until we have that evidence, we do not feel comfortable. We're comfortable with signing what is effectively a statement of the existing situation. It is a statement of the fact in terms of where we are. But in terms of what it does for North Warwickshire, well, it just addresses the fact that we have proactively involved ourselves with the memorandum of saying, and therefore we, as well as Coventry, are involved and addressing the duty to cooperate. But it doesn't advance the question any further of where that plan is going to be addressed. So yes, it is a quandary that they will, I believe, find difficult to address when they get to the inquiry place in front of the inspector.
Thank you.
So putting that into my words, doesn't do anything for us, it does precious little for Coventry either. I don't think I've ever seen a recommendation that we enter into a legal agreement before where our officers in the report are saying that it's not complete. There are issues to do. But honestly, Chairman, my view on this is that it is entirely premature. And I think that these issues, as identified by the 2 bullet points in section 4.6 of the report, relating to the issue of residual employment land and the lack of clarity, need to be resolved and should have been resolved before this report came to us. I'd like to propose that a changed recommendation that we do not endorse or sign this MOU and that officers continue their discussions in a spirit of cooperation. They meet the requirements to consult with our neighbours and to act. And if they get to a point where these issues have been resolved and this paper is actually meaningful, well, then they can bring it back to us and we can look at it. But at the minute, it seems to me that there's, on the face of it, a lot of motherhood and apple pie in here, that this is a good thing to do, but it doesn't actually mean much. And there's no positive benefit for us in doing so. Now, we've had these before, haven't we? A year, maybe 2 years ago, Nuneaton and Bedworth sent one to us. And we fairly unceremoniously sent it back and said we were not prepared to sign. So the fact that somebody comes up with an MOU does not mean you have to sign it, because otherwise you're not being a good corporate citizen. There is a choice to be made. And my choice, my opinion, I'm absolutely prepared to be proven wrong, is there are inevitably risks in this for us. And I can't see anything on the positive side. I was, Chairman, engaged directly with the MOU on housing some years ago. And I draw your attention on page 54 of 114 in section number 7, liaisons. Member level representatives of the local authorities will meet when appropriate in order to maintain and update the memorandum as necessary. We did that in advance with the housing one. Members as well as officers of each authority were engaged. I'm curious as to that this has been discussed. I'm not aware that any member from this authority was engaged in it. We had a clear process for the housing MOU, that there was member level engagement in drawing it up. Why is this different? And why are we only appropriate to consider maintaining and updating and not the generality of drawing it up to begin with? I think this needs to go back and someone needs to correct their homework before it comes back to us. So for the avoidance of doubt, Mr. Chairman, I propose that the MOU is not signed and that officers continue their work with our neighbour authorities to get to a situation where it might be signed.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Hayfield.
Thank you, Chair. A number of points. I don't claim to understand all the nuances of it. I'm just looking at some of the more simplistic stuff, or simplistic, in other words, I can understand it on page 54 and 55. Coventry has a problem, and it doesn't have enough space for its employment. And it doesn't have enough space for its gypsy and traveller sites. And so, this paper seems to be about is how Coventry can try and dump employment sites on its neighbours and dump gypsy and traveller sites on its neighbours. We are some of those neighbours. And we know, for example, that first of all, gypsy and traveller sites are not exactly popular items in North Warwickshire, and also that any industrial land inevitably leads to housing pressures that follows that. So I think we should be sending a signal to the Coventry City Council. It's not going to get an easy ride from us on this in terms of receiving their unmet industrial needs and their unmet gypsy traveller sites. There may be a duty to cooperate, but as the cynics amongst us know, you can either cooperate helpfully or you can cooperate somewhat less helpfully. And I would be looking to cooperate less helpfully. And if Mark's looking for a seconder, I will happily second him. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayfield. I mean, there are a couple of points so I might, if I could raise, like on Appendix A, when you look through it, 3.3, it talks about an alignment paper. I'm and apologies if I've missed it, whether other members in this chamber have seen the alignment paper, but that's one point. And 4.6.1 says at the time of signing this agreement, it's considered that the HEDNA and WMSES alignment paper constitutes robust evidence. Now, I thought we had our own survey around employment need. And I was going to pick up the 5.4 around the gypsy sites, but Councillor Hayfield's already done that. So I guess I'm at the point of actually agreeing with my fellow councillors that it's probably premature, that we should probably push this back. Because what I'd also like to see in here from an MOU is what do we want from them? Because actually, until we've done our own assessment, there might be that we need 45 hectares of employment land from them. So I think from my perspective, I'm happy to accept the proposal that we don't sign the memorandum of understanding, that we do push back and review. We probably have a bit more of a robust kind of document that I think we'd all be happy with. So with that in mind, I've got a proposer to defer or not sign as part of the recommendation. I have a seconder to that. Do I have any other proposals? No, so all those in favour of the, oh, sorry, councillor.
Just to say that I'm in broad agreement with Councillor Simpson. That I think that I mean we could argue on bits and pieces, but I don't think we will. So I'm in broad agreement with the proposal.
Okay, thank you. So all those in favour to not sign? That's carried. No, sorry, Mike, do you want to
It
come
was
back?
just a bit, it was just a point of clarity. Be aware that the Chicksham travel issue is Rugby's issue, and they're negotiating with Leicestershire and Northamptonshire, not with Warwickshire. But it's a point of statement of fact that they've made as part of the.
But I guess I'd question why it's in there then. If it's not our problem, I'd sooner not articulate things that are not our problem. And that's just kind of, I like it nice and simple, you know, let's not throw more mud in there because it makes it more complicated.
You're absolutely right, Chairman, and given that this is supposed to be about employment land, it spends half of its paper talking about housing. You know, I would say if this is about employment land, it should be about employment land and not tricking in stuff on housing land and chips and travel sites.
Thank you. So Dot might be, yeah, go away, yeah, and then just, obviously you've heard people's views.
Yeah.
And we've seen all in agreement on that.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us on to agenda item number 7, which is the draft employment development plan document, which you've all had a copy for. You should also have on your tables some maps. They should give you a visual indication of where those sites are. So you can actually see them. I think EP3 and EP4, are they correct now? Are they still the wrong way around?
No, I think they are actually correct. I think I'd misread the document.
Oh, okay.
When I was talking to you earlier.
Okay, so we think they're the right way around now.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
So is that yourself, Dot, or is it?
no, it's me. Yeah, it's me on this one. So what you have before you is as appendix A, so page 67. Apologies. Of your plan is a draft employment plan, regulation 19. So this is where people would make comments on the soundness of the plan, as well as on the effectiveness, justification, and its delivery. So what you have here is essentially a mini plan. It doesn't allocate any new sites in the green belt. It just seeks to the delivery of Coleshill Manor that has been a long-standing planning application for a number of years. Would it be helpful if I go through it one by one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got the general introduction context, and then the first policy that you come to is EP1, which is on page 8 of the appendix, or 74 of the pack. And the figure that is there is 42 hectares of employment land. Now this figure comes from a study that we've done locally, which unfortunately is still in draft form. We're just getting it finalised at the moment. But we wanted to bring this to members before we actually finalise that evidence, just because we need also the sustainability appraisal and habitat regulation assessments to be completed. So it was just to make sure that we've got enough time in the future to be able to get that completed. So you'll see that it's come from a number of places. We've got the Coventry and Warwickshire HEDNA, which is the Housing and Employment Development Needs Study that was published back in 2022. There was then the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study that talked about just strategic sites. Then there was an alignment paper between those, because both talked about strategic sites and local sites, but there needed to be some alignment to show how those figures, so the one paper wasn't actually saying X and the other one was saying Y, and there was no, there had to be the clear clarity about why the figures were different or some consistency in those. So that's where the alignment for the Coventry and Warwickshire paper comes to. And then you'll see at 4.8 is the local study that I was just referring to. And as soon as we've got a version, a finalised version, we'll be able to share that with all members. So what the figure that's in there is 42 hectares of employment land. So as you will see, we've continued to say that it also depends on the delivery of infrastructure as well, because that's in the adopted plan. So this policy would partly replace LP5 from the adopted local plan that deals with employment land. So that would be the only section of that plan of that policy that would then be replaced by this one. So this would be that part of it would be superseded, so to effect. Shall I take any questions before I move on? Yes. I thought there would be.
Councillor Lee and then Councillor Hayfield.
You can hear me anyway without putting that thing on. So EP1 is obviously the extension to Endurance Park. It's not Kingsbury Road. Kingsbury Road would be in Kingsbury. This is Trinity Road. So Trinity Road goes from the M42 all the way up through Piccadilly and up into Kingsbury. So all the way through the report, it talks about Kingsbury Road, which should be Trinity Road. Obviously, if this was to be delivered, this is obviously a very easy ask to be able to deliver quickly because it's already got the access into it off Trinity Road. And obviously, if we're still waiting for the report in relation to our employment need figures, my concern is that on that Endurance Park, we've got two buildings there. One is T119, which has got 119,372 square feet, 1,193 per annum. And the other one we've got is T49 at 498,000 at 548 per square annum, and they're vacant. And you would think that on Junction 10 they would be being stacked up. So I am concerned about the reports that we've got coming in and the demand locally. Is it that if we had bigger boxes that the demand would increase and that's a site for bigger boxes, or is it that we actually need startups like Councillor Humphreys and I are always concerned about? Sort of, we don't have anything really coming forward in relation to startup units. So I am concerned about accuracies and practicalities of what the current economic situation is in North Warwickshire and our demand level. So I get that this is in it, and obviously it was originally part of our meaningful gap, our strategic gap, which obviously failed a few years ago for an appeal. So obviously this and the other sites coming forward would mean that the gap on that side of the A5 would be completed. And I take it further on that would be in relation to the plans to look again, evaluate this sort of like the significant gap, and going down the line that Jordan wouldn't have any significant gap on the north side, east side of the A5, but it would be on the other side where the Hodges appeal was. So that was my concern about the, bringing that forward and looking at the practicalities. And obviously, again, it would encroach very much on the hamlet of Freesley. They talk about 200 metres, I think, buffer zone. Now, would that be 200 metres all the way around Freesley? Because I don't think it's in that first field off where there's a pathway through off Trinity Road. But I wonder how much that would encroach onto some of the those outstanding buildings there in the hamlet. I don't think that could possibly be 200 metres. But again, you know, I'm willing to be, you know, corrected on that. So it will impact again, that it'll have the impact that we'll completely lose our strategic gap on that side. There's our rurality gone completely on that side of the A5. How will Freesley cope? How are we going to protect Freesley from the lighting, the traffic, the noise? I think that would be very important. And, you know, I understand the need to deliver, if it's what we say that we need to deliver, but please let us make sure that we are actually doing it right and that there isn't this pressure demand, and it's not written by these things, not written by people that are in the business to make money.
Thank you, councillor Ridley. Did you want to come back on that? So, and I agree with you. Obviously, this is identification of the land. It still has to go through formal planning, etc. process. So those considerations about lighting, about access and traffic and all that should be addressed as part of that. But yes, it's a point well made. I had councillor Hayfield next, and then councillor Hayfield.
So in terms of a little bit about startup things, I mean, years ago, the council used to have its own industrial areas in each park and others, which could, we got, I think we got rid of them in the end, but they were potential startup areas. If you want to create startup areas, I've got to think about it. I'm sure I'm being incredibly simplistic on this, but it looks as though we're looking at the map and there's a space there, we can put some industrial units there, or there's another space there, we can put some industrial units there, etc., etc. But they don't exist in isolation, do they? Because if you, you've got to look at what sort of employment is going to take place on those. You're going to look at where the workforce is going to come from. You're going to look at the travel to work, directions of travel to work, and impact on highways, etc., etc. So, I'm sure you'll tell me you're already doing this. If I've only read paragraphs and so I'll see it. But are we looking strategically at where in the borough we actually need or could use employment land in terms of where we have considerable areas of housing or unemployment and things, and we could actually do with some employment in there? I'm just a little concerned that this is. No, I'll stop there. I've said what I wanted to say.
Yes,
I'll come on a similar sort of point. You've got this lot allocating more land for business use for these large industrial units, when the one next to Piccadilly, which is 3 times the size of the village, we've got units standing empty. It seems to me we should be encouraging people to utilise what's already there before we start turfing more of our land over to more industrial units. Just this big fad of sticking more of these things up, but then they sit empty for a while, and then all we end up panicking about, and I'm not accusing this, is who's going to be, you start squatting on it. It's then once the building's empty, it's like, oh great, right, let's put some more up. It just seems a bonkers methodology to me. It really does. I'm just looking at it now, it's twice the size of, 3 times the size of Piccadilly, and half it's not used. Just use some of that.
Thank you. So, councillor Simpson first, and councillor Simmons.
Thanks, Chairman. I agree with what colleagues are saying on this. I would just sort of say that this is the plan to 2045, not 2025. It's looking forward, and you know we have to have an adequate supply of land for that future period. But the part I absolutely agree with is, how do we know? And at the minute, we have this proposal to go out to consultation, and we're told that the evidence base is currently being prepared and we haven't got it. We'll get it at some point. I'm slightly worried we go out to consultation on something that we haven't actually seen and agreed and understood, for all the sort of reasons that Councillor Phillips and Councillor Hayfield were just talking about. How do we get ourselves comfortable that this is the right answer and the report isn't here yet? Now, look, I think it's fair to say I equally get the point in terms of we need to move with some degree of pace. So we can't simply do nothing, but I do think that something that is as substantial to me of saying 42 hectares, is that the right answer or the wrong answer? Particularly when the last time we went to consultation and went to a local understanding with the inspector, he sent us back and told us we've got to have LP6 because we hadn't got that number right. So I am concerned about going out in that basis, because I do think it's absolutely right that we need to have more comfort that what this recommendation is saying is right. You know, I have deep misgivings. One of the things about the West Midlands Strategic Employment Study that bothered me was, how do we know the numbers right when all they've done is taken what was there and multiplied it up by anticipated demand? No, nothing that said actually in that area you need startups. You know, but I don't want to develop big boxes, but we need big boxes. I remember about 2 years ago, I was told that we've got about 28 minutes of supply left. Well, we've still got big boxes that are empty. We've still got people knocking on the door saying you have to do it tomorrow. But the evidence, as I understand it, is based upon a straight line calculation of the percentage of it. That's not credible evidence. And it's not saying to us that we need those big boxes, rather more. So we need starting units for people to actually be employed and do meaningful work as opposed to not. I think, Joe, we're going to talk, are we, on the other policies going forward? But my question fundamentally is, has any of this been gone through by a lawyer yet? Has there been a legal review of the wording to say it says what it needs to say in the right way? Have we had a legal review? Then I think before it goes to consultation, Chairman, we need to have a lawyer.
Okay.
So if we are happy, I'm not saying we are, but if we are happy that this goes to consultation, there has to be a legal review in advance. Because if we're going to then at some point have a legal review, we're only going to have to make changes we could have made in advance of going to consultation. And I think that is critical. Whenever we look at any planning site at the minute, all we do is get to a meeting and then we're the next thing is, well, how much are we going to spend on the supplementary budget to pay for a bunch of lawyers to argue our case? If we don't take the opportunity to get a legal input in advance, I think we're missing the opportunity. Number one, I do want to move ahead with as much pace as we can get, but I'd like to see the review that tells us what we're going for is right. I'd like us all to be able to say, yes, we agree, we understand. And I'd like a lawyer to say that actually we've written this in the right way. Because when I look at EP1, it only says to me, the amount of development delivered will be governed by the provision of infrastructure. And I accept that the other policies, EP2, 3 and what have you, have further qualifications in terms of how. But I don't know, because I'm thankfully not a lawyer, if we need to put more into EP1 to give us safeguards in terms of how the planning board will be able to interpret that policy. And EP1 sounds a bit bold to me. It may be correct, but I just don't know. And without a legal review, we'll never know.
Yeah, just before I bring Councillor Simmons and then Councillor Ridley in, I absolutely agree. Many of you know in previous existence, I was the portfolio holder for economy within Warwickshire, and I would often have this argument about employment led. Because actually, if you look at unemployment within Warwickshire, it's relatively low. So when we talk about what's the employment need, I think there is a piece of work to be done. Is it employment need for people within North Warwickshire, or is it employment need for people from Birmingham to commute into North Warwickshire or Tamworth to commute into North Warwickshire? And I think that's one of the important questions. Picking up on Councillor Phillips. It is insane that we have empty units sat there and then we're considering building others. And one of the other things, what I'm really keen on, along the startup line almost, but it's also, I don't want necessarily just more logistic sheds. Let's go for advanced engineering. Let's go for meaningful jobs. Let's go for career jobs that people can go into and then have longevity of a career. Councillor Sims.
I was going to make a very similar point actually. And much of what I said has just been said by Councillor Simpson, but I know it's to 2045 and I'm new to this board, but I think one of the things that really genuinely concerns me is it's more of the same. And where is our desire for the people of this
borough for North Warwickshire, for young people who are in school now, training now, or will be training in 10, 15 years' time, to have proper skilled roles rather than more of the same, which are being replaced by automation, which are being replaced in lots of ways. You know, what do we want to be? We've got almost full employment, didn't we? Wasn't one of the studies 1.7 jobs for our population, per head of population in North Warwickshire? So actually, what is our employment demand? What is our employment need for our people, first and foremost? And actually, is this the right thing? Do we want to saddle them with more low paid, low skill work? Or do we want to promote an area of high skill growth, development, opportunity? We've got Warwick University on the doorstep. We've got, you know, we have universities within our boundaries, on our doorstep, and we should be looking to push that forward. I know we haven't got a crystal ball, we don't know what AI is going to bring in the future, but everything is looking at development and having that linear approach to growth that Mark alluded to, and about development of our area to meet that demand is completely wrong. We can't even envisage some of the jobs some of the young people will have now in the future, some of our young people that exist being born now that will have, let alone what building they might want to do it in, or what kind of environment we're going to saddle them with to do it in. So I think we should be more aspirational, and this paper to me isn't aspirational.
No, it's a really valid point. I mean, one of the other things you'll notice in the paper that we put in there was the map of the Golden Triangle. Everybody refers to the Golden Triangle and almost thinks it's kind of North Warwickshire. Actually, the Golden Triangle is much bigger than just North Warwickshire. And I think we need to actually have that aspirational consideration. And you're absolutely right. Those jobs of the future, it is a bit of crystal ball gazing because we don't know. And is it the right thing? But at least if we allocate the land and the sites, it doesn't mean what type of building is going to go on there. And that bit we don't know. Councillor Wrigley, and then I'll come to Councillor Hayfield.
Good points, well made. And I have to say, the officers had already considered this. So, you know, it's, you know, the report is well written and considered. It's just that obviously there is, I think, 1.36 jobs for every working age person in North Warwickshire. So we don't need the jobs here. So it will be people, like you say, from outside that come in. And also the point was made about the fact that it happened exactly in the coal mining industry. Birch Coppice was a coal mine that completely went. You know, everything was concentrated on that coal mine. We've got to be careful we're not doing it again with big boxes. So that's why it is so important to bring in different types of manufacturing jobs, startup jobs, innovation, give people an opportunity to do fantastic things, because we have got gifted people in this country that just need the opportunity to do it, and not just move goods from one place to another. That's my real concern. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Small point I forgot to make, Chairman, so we need to amend 4.10 given our previous decision.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Business we've agreed.
I don't get made a point.
Thank you. Colin.
Come back to your point about sort of quality employment, if you like. There's a bit of a sort of dichotomy here, because certainly our skills base in North Warwickshire, school output in a lot of our schools was more suited to logistics sites than they were quality ones. But on the other hand, if you have a job on logistics in North Warwickshire, you're probably not going to earn a salary to be able to afford a house in North Warwickshire. You're preferred to go to Nuneaton or Smith's Wood or something and commuting in, but their house prices are cheaper there and you could do it. There's a balancing act on all these things, but it's getting the right. I guess the problem is we allocate a site and say, yes, you can have that for employment land, and then we have to wait and see who actually puts in an application as to what it's going to be like. But I don't see why we shouldn't try and work things to try and encourage certain types of employment in certain parts of the borough.
Certainly. Councillor Phillips.
I think the easiest way to encourage people to build anything other than boxes is not perfectly near Junction 10. I know it's a bit unpopular, but looking near the other population centres. You don't want to start driving a large articulated lorry through some of the smaller villages, are you? You're going to be forced to have small startups then, aren't you? If we can put our employment land near smaller population centres away from the larger roads, then we're discouraging it by the nature of just not opening it up. That is a relatively simple solution there.
And it is a very interesting one, and going back previously, looking at after economy for Warwickshire. But they did a lot of those where they had smaller sites and they were specifically built for a 1 or 2 man startup band that then could grow and progress into other sites as their business grew. I mean, one of the other interesting ones for me is actually we talk about 48 hectares. I mean, it's a large area. Actually, if you put 42 hectares of logistics, that could have like 100 people in it, because most of it, as Councillor Simmons has said, will be automated, etc. If you have that heavy engineering, that number of people goes up. So it is very prevalent on what you're going to put there as to the amount of space you need. And I think we should try and keep that. But it is a really difficult model. I think the officers have a really difficult job of trying to work out what that looks like. Sometimes it's a simplistic kind of model to say it's just a number. But as Doc knows, and as many of you know, I'm really keen. Give me a number. What is the number? Is it 42 hectares? And when we're looking at the housing, which we'll look at some point of view, what's the number? Councillor Simpson.
To that point entirely, Chair. And one of my reasons for wanting a legal review was to understand if all we get on EP1 is applications for B8 logistics, do we have within this policy an opportunity to say, actually, no, we want general industrial use? And I absolutely, and all my colleagues have said is, we need to be encouraging. I mean, the report does talk about the need for diversification and the risks that we end up back in the situation we were with the coal industry. But unless we put safeguards into this, I don't see much chance in here of us actually being able to turn around and say, actually, we've got more than enough logistics, we'd actually like something else. And I think we have to set that template at this stage to be able to have a hope of getting more of that, because at the end of the day, at the minute, it seems like the logistics people are the ones with the money, they're doing the development. But we then use our 42 hectares for all of that, and where do we then get the general employment or the innovation jobs? And I think we said something along that line for the area that we allocate for development next to Myra. We were quite clear over what we wanted. All of this seems that it's almost anything.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good idea. And I don't know if it's something we could include that said, actually, we want, if we're going to be allocating employment land, we want it for a specific type of employment land and not just B8 logistics. That's Hayfield.
I think dangerous if you end up saying, well, everybody's 30 hectares, 40 hectares of employment land. You look for a big site there, big site there, big site there, that'll do it. Then big sites, you're going to look more likely to get logistics and stuff. That's what tends to go on big sites. We've got, certainly around the rural area around us, we've got farm buildings, complexes that have got little businesses growing in there that bringing in millions of quid a year, but they're employing half a dozen people or so. Small businesses often attracted to small sites, and perhaps we should be thinking in terms of allocating employment land to look to a number of smaller sites as well as just pumping great big ones and solve it all in one go.
And I think that's what Councillor Simmons was saying. Actually, let's be aspirational. What Councillor was saying, let's be aspirational about. Actually, do we need to look at this differently? Do we say actually, if we want those SMEs, those startups, those kind of technical jobs, should we be looking at a different type of location rather than a large site? So, okay. Well, I'm conscious we've done EP1. We've got the other actual more detail on the actual site. Has everybody had a chance to look at the other sites? Has anyone got any comments on the other sites as identified? EP2, 3, 4, and I think 7. Any comments on Colshaw?
EP3. So this is effectively the allotments which belong to North Yorkshire Borough Council. And I think in the local plan it was all part of a land swap with Birch Coppice Social Club. which I understand that that's not going to happen now, that Birch Coppice Social Club aren't planning to move. Is that the thing, that's right?
So E2 from the North Warwickshire local plan, which is under EP3 there on the plan.
Yeah.
Is, yes, it was just over 5 hectares. 1.5 was the allotment, but they were going north of the A5, so across the road. The E3 is one from the local plan. So we've just shown that on this plan, just so that you were made aware that there's still E3 there. But we do have a meeting with the organisation that is the background of that CISWO. So we've got a meeting with them that's imminent. So we will find out. But I suppose it's really strange because this is a mini employment plan, but it's not the local plan review of the whole of the local plan. And some of the comments this evening, we can feed into that overall local plan review, but equally we could also feed those into this plan as well. But yes, it was considered that E3, so that was the CISWO site where the club is, they were going to move to the northern side of the A5 as well. But because we're not in a situation to know exactly what's happening, that's the reason why it's not included within this employment plan.
Councillor Humphries. Councillor Simpson.
I would say, confirming what Councillor Ridley said there, there's quite a lot of money going to be put into the club. They're definitely not going to move now. They're putting hundreds of thousands into that club, upgrading everything. So it's, and I was only talking to the people that organise the club, and also through CISWO, and so I think you'll find that will disappear as a site.
Councillor Simpson.
It was partially on my earlier point, Sharon. I see within EP2 and EP4, we specifically referenced B2, B8, EG3. And that's really where I think if we are saying even at this stage, logistics, then I am wary. Now I understand that some of it will end up being logistics. But what we've been trying to do on other sites late in the day after the event is have some agreement over what proportion is B8 as opposed to what proportion is B2. Yeah. But if we are now saying that these extensions will be potentially 100% B8, then I am genuinely concerned. I don't think we should be saying that. Do you want comments on the whole while we're going? We'll jump to wait until we come to the next.
Yeah, no. Sorry.
Okay.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I was going to say that we could have a look at that to see if there's a way that we could do some proportion.
Yeah.
On the proposed allocations.
I certainly think members would be happier if we had something in our ammunition that said, you know, it's not all going to be large logistic sheds, and we'll have something to say no because we want some B2s and
it's not reasonable for us to forecast that, Sharon.
Agreed.
On EP4, I generally have a concern here because we seem to be taking it as bit that this soil heap won't work as a country park. I remember, because I chaired the subcommittee that did it, for about 2.5 years, we went through the whole process of trying to say that would become a country park. I don't remember at any point being told the slopes are too steep and unstable. And if we're saying that now, I'd like to understand why we were misinformed when we went through that whole process of allocating that site as a country park. Yeah, there was a quid pro quo for the residents in that part of North Warwickshire that there would be some recreational land. Now we seem to be saying, well, actually, we got it wrong. We're not doing that. And what are we doing instead? How is that going to be provided? On top of that, as far as the policy itself is concerned, it seems to me that in EP4 we're saying we'll pay for this viability study. I'm just not convinced that's right. I think the viability study should be paid for by the people who are going to benefit from that. I accept there's a benefit to us in finding more employment land. But I really don't feel like subsidising a large property developer to tell him how he can make money. I think they should do that themselves. Now, if the report is saying, actually, no, somebody else should do it, then I'm delighted. Somebody else should do it. We should not. My point on legal review, I think, is, to me, brought home on EP6, where the second paragraph seems to say to me, well, we're going to develop alternative, I'll read it out. Proposals for employment development outside the existing employment areas and development boundaries will be supported where these do not have an unacceptable adverse impact on the amenities of residential properties of all the wider environment and the local highway network. That seems a pretty big, we will support alternative employment. I accept it's sort of qualified by the following paragraph, but that to me reads as a standalone comment, not qualified, which is why I think we absolutely have to have a thorough legal review. I am, in terms of lorry park, 4.35, we talk about the alternative available sites. Why do we always forget Norton Keynes? Norton Keynes has got 65 lorry parks, and the last thing I read on the internet, I mean, you know, how good I am at the internet. It took me 30 seconds to find out they got 65 spaces, of which 90% was unused. They've got 25 bus spaces as well. Well, that's almost the size of the Rugby MSA. Why are we not including Norton Keynes here? It's nearer to us than Rugby. And it could be a significant amount of additional lorry parking. I don't think we should ignore that. I accept it's on a toll road, but again, my fantastic techie ability on the internet says that if you want to just go and park, it's 33 quid. If you want to go park, get a 10 quid voucher at the tuck shop and pay for your toll, it's 35 quid. So actually, it doesn't cost anybody anything to go and put their lorry parking at Norton Keynes. They get at least 8 quid benefit from the tuck shop as well as parking for the same price. I don't think 35 quid is beyond what they've charged at other sites. So I get the point, it's a toll road. I do not get the point that we are not including those 65 HGV and 25 bus spaces within our review of what's available. So, you know, I mean, I think I get that we do need lorry parking. We do. But I think, along with what's been said earlier, there needs to be a firmer requirement on all of these sites that the developments, as approved, consume their own smoke. They're all good at saying, yeah, we're just in time, and fine, that's all right. But when the chap comes from, he's got to get here 12 hours in advance to be sure he's just in time. They don't provide for that, and they must, in my view, Chairman, provide for the capacity of the demand that's going to be delivered, not just 2 hours in advance, because that's what just in time requires. So I think I understand we need extra lorry parking, but I think we need to bolster up by saying the developments that we're proposing in here actually consume all of their smoke, not just the immediate smoke.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Do I assume from all of what you just said, you're happy with EP5 then, Doleshill Manor? It's the only way you can be. Look, it wasn't an
I
invitation.
have never yet known anybody that can confidence project that I'm happy with anything.
That's true, very true. And I do take on board your point. One of my concerns with EP6 is I would really not want that to just be a shoehorn for Thrive, because I think everybody knows my opinion of Thrive, you know, from the perspective of the concerns around infrastructure.
Not that you're prejudicing what the report.
I'm not prejudging anything. I just have concerns around infrastructure because it's busy. That's good.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just to take up Councillor Simpson's point about the Sporley, but I do remember I wasn't on the committee at the time, but I remember the talk about it, and also Councillor Mawson talking about it now. It was going to be a park, and I would imagine that's, I mean, I would imagine the amount of money it would take to clear the spoiling would be very, I mean, would be small to the amount of money it would take to stabilise that. If it, I should imagine I would reasonably stable by now, or stable-ish. I mean, some of it, as I say, would be. I mean, but I'd have thought the money spent on stabilising would be insignificant. The amount of money it would take to move the stuff and to shift. I mean, if you're going to move it, it's best to move it years ago before there was trees and the rest of it, and it was seeded. You know, it would be such a job to move it, and like you say, we are losing out on some of that. That if it's not ready now, I mean, perhaps an investigation to see how viable it is. I know that some years ago you could still see steam rising from it. Like I said, the pressures, we've been used to these spoil heaps around here for years, so you see them breaking into fires. So it was so then that it wasn't probably right. But I mean, it may be. It's probably worth looking into now and seeing just how stable it is. It may never be ready, but it's certainly worth looking into and seeing what can be done with it, rather than just another shed place. You know, if we can get something nice out of it in a country place, and it does, you know, when it's seeded and growing, it does look quite nice. So I always remember that before they took the one down in Piccadilly, it used to approach it down Trinity Road, and especially in the winter time with the snow on it, you could think it was in the Alps. You know, once the trees were covered in snow and things, you know, you could forget the coal heap.
Thank you. Councillor.
Just a quick question.
There's something you could put your name to.
Doria.
Just wondered if there'd been a heritage, so because it is a landscape heritage thing, you know. I just wondered if we looked at that, whether there'd been an assessment in relation to, it's industrial heritage, isn't it? You know, my poor old great granddad died down there, so it is. So when you drive along the A5, it is now regenerated. Its topsoil was put on top of it, I think.
I think so.
And obviously a lot of that has washed off, but the trees have grown magnificently, and obviously all the leaf compost and whatnot is regenerated. There's even grass on it now. So, you know, it's not a blot on the landscape anymore. It is a green spot on the landscape. So I wondered if we'd had a heritage assessment of it or anything. Have we done that yet?
No, I haven't even doing that. But I mean, I take it from what has been said today that it would be better if we, at the moment, exclude that policy from if we're going to carry forward with the employment plan, to see and get the information about the country park. But as far as I was aware, the information that you have before you is, as far as I know, is correct. That it is far too steep. It isn't something that they will ever be allowed for public access. But I can definitely find out some more information on that.
Thanks. I mean, I think Councillor Simpson's point around who pays for the review, and Councillor Phillips.
No, that was expected to be somebody else, and tweak the word.
Yeah, and I think that legal review as well, to make sure it says what we want it to say. Councillor Hayfield.
Can I just put Darby on the spot in terms of discussion we've had about trying to perhaps find smaller industrial sites for a better quality service? Whether that's stuff that in practical terms you can bring forward through this plan, or whether it's something that you might anticipate with slight lessening of some of the rules, emerging just through the normal planning process and people seeing an opportunity to, you know, develop these buildings into this or that. Can you, rather than big lumpy sites of employment, logistic then, how practical is it to come forward with smaller starter unit area allocations?
We've had very few, I would say, actual sites that have been put forward for small units. They tend to be the larger sites. What I was going to suggest as part of this, that if, say, EP2 was carried forward, so that's the Injulant Park site, that would be one that had a range of size of units, so that there could be some proportions being considered in there as to what could actually be delivered.
And as it backs onto Freesley, that might be really appropriate in.
Yeah, I mean, we have said about the 200 buffer anyway, but yeah, the smaller the units closer to them, it would be less of an impact.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's good that that's on the northern side of them, so any overshadowing, similar to the one that you've got at Birch Coppice, at the other end of Birch Coppice, there's a big unit that overshadows the properties close to it. I mean, it's quite overbearing, I think. So we want to avoid any of that as much as we possibly can, if not avoid it completely. So that is one of the reasons why in EP2 there is the particular wording about the buffer zone, the impact on the neighbours, and that the buffer zone would be at least 200 metres. So there may be instances where it could be even more than that. So that was the reason behind that. And apologies that that's me that's done the Kingsbury Road. Apologies for that. I must have wrote it down the first time and just carried on with it. So apologies for that.
And I think I think one of the important things and the reason for the conversation is actually you know kind of what's in your head, you know what you're thinking. If you want to make sure that when someone's reading it cold or reading it without all of your knowledge, can also then interpret it correctly. But I think it would be really nice to have something in there similar to we do with housing estates, where we'll say we want some 2, 3 bed houses, social housing, to actually specify that there is some percentages there that say actually some of these units will be these smaller advanced engineering or startup types scalable units for those sizes. Councillor Humphries.
I was just saying, hearing what you said there, Dorothy, makes you, sometimes you can laugh about it, because if you look at back end of Core 42, which comes out on Lower House Farm Road, that strip of land behind the houses there, as soon as they built that 60 feet building, they put 12 terrace houses along in there, so people will fill the gap. And I've seen in my own life before, and I know it's going back a while now, but they built a bypass around Ashford in Kent. And the minute the bypass was built, they filled the gap in right up where the back gardens backed right up, so people will see your 200 metres.
Thank you.
If I could just say though, in that particular instance, those 2 planning applications were submitted and then considered at the same planning meeting.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any chance for that, for the buffering or anything else. But what was considered at the time was all the information in terms of overshadowing, things like that. But now that it's been built, I think you can see how overbearing that particular development is. And it's just a lesson to be learned in terms of that.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Small point and a big point, Chairman. On EP2, we comment that focus of any improvements will be to improve accessibility for existing and future Dordon and Polesworth residents. I don't disagree with that. But given where the access to the site is going to be, it's as close to Kingsbury and Wood End and Hurley as it is to the outer reaches of Polesworth. I think we need to look to people who live in Dordon and Polesworth, but there are other areas in a similar distance who are just as much in need. And then my sort of big point, if that was your one, is not sure where we're at now, because I think we've provided significant feedback on various policies. And whilst I genuinely do want to proceed with pace, because the sooner we start doing this, the sooner it's finished, and we need to get ourselves into a situation of safety. But I think there's been significant comment that's sort of saying, actually, I'd like to see a revised version of point.
And I was going to flag that as well. And I think when I was looking at the recommendations, I don't think we're in a position, based on all the information and the comments that have been made, to actually support the recommendation to move to regulation 19. I think we'd like to see something come back, perhaps a removal of EP4 or something more EP4 around what the spoil heat, what the options could be. And then some more detail on the other, EP 2 and 3. And I'd certainly like some more clarity on EP 1 around the number and some specifications around what does 42 hectares mean? If you have small sites with 100 people working in it, that's very different to a very large site with 100 people working in it, I think. Mike, did you want to make a comment?
It was just to make members aware, it was referred to earlier about what is the availability of small sites for some small settlements, particularly Councillor David raised that issue. We do have a limited number. I would refer you back to the earlier committee report we dealt with for the call for sites, which I think was last July. And that had not all, but it had a significant number of the sites that we do have available to look at. I would raise the concern that the majority of those are within the green belt. So I'm thinking top of my head in terms of the most obvious ones to myself, because I know these sites like the back of my hand is Arley, Old and New, Kingsbury, Hurley, Wateraughton, notwithstanding the fact that HS2 is in the way. Areas around Longley and areas even more remote, but Annesley is another one, but Annesley Common rather than Annesley. So there is some worries that in terms of the ability to get through quickly, if we were avoiding the greenbelt sites. But we can look at them and consider them forward. But that does mean that then we are looking at releasing it. So I want you to be aware that there is always another side to the coin, another implication you need to be aware.
But we haven't had the output of the Greenbelt review yet, have we? Which could well actually identify some of those locations, and obviously now we're all becoming much more familiar with what grey belt means and the relevancies of that. So I'm probably sure that people would actually consider it. I mean, obviously we don't prejudge anything until it's in front of us. That's about considering what those options are. But I think we'd like to be given the option. I certainly think for a consideration, for some of those sites.
That's helpful, Chair. I just wanted that confidence that if we did have those sites and you were willing to discipline as part of that exercise.
Councillor Phillips,
I say if we was aware of those sites before they came to committees and became sort of a broader knowledge, we could consultate with our residents and see what their feelings are. So we don't, end up throwing a fox into the house sort of thing. That'd be quite useful.
So given all what we said, it seems like we're not going to be sending this to consultation at the moment. But I am anxious that we don't lose pace.
No, I agree.
And I think there is a large amount of conversation to be had. So, I genuinely do need an additional meeting just to go through that as soon as officers have had a chance to draft the amendments, because we do need to move quickly with these things. And I think, I can't remember, it's the next meeting August, so I'd rather we did it before August.
It is August now. I guess it's dependent on what the officers can get done in time or when we get 4 weeks.
I have a slight problem.
You're on holiday.
I am. So,
If it's August, it's August. But, I'm genuinely trying to make the point that
Yeah, no.
I recognise that getting it right is important. Recognise the pace.
And I agree with that.
the next meeting is in early September. And that- I think it's around about the 9th or the 11th of September, the next meeting of the ODA. So we could aim to bring a version back then, but in the meantime, we could have a discussion offline as well, just a meeting to talk about it before we actually bring it back to.
I mean, if we can see a revised kind of options that we can discuss it and swap via email, I think the board would be happy with that.
Well, it depends what it says, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, the process, not the actual content. Okay, so I think based on that, obviously we won't move the recommendation. We'll wait to see what we come back, what comes back to us.
Could the recommendation be that the draft employment plan be brought back to members for further discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Close up, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I have a seconder for that? Have a seconder, all in favour? That's carried, yeah. Yeah. Okay, one more to go. We have agenda item 8, which is review of the North Warwickshire Local Plan 2021.
Okay, so what you have before you is a review of the existing local plan. It doesn't look to new policies at all. It is purely a review of what we have in the local plan that is adopted. And I do apologise because I hadn't realised till today, but we've actually colour coded these boxes, which might have been a lot easier for members to have read. So I don't know if the online version
Yeah,
It's
that's
actually-
a living colour there, Chair.
is in colour, but we can make sure anybody that wants a paper version can have that. But if I can bring you to on page 88 of the 114, which is in the board report, it's the same table as the one at the end of the appendix. And this just gives you a summary of where we see the main changes that will be. So there will be modifications needed to LP3 because of course the introduction of grey belt. So we will have to consider that the amount of employment land, housing land and gypsy traveller sites would be the one that would come under LP5. And then the other one is LP35, the renewable energy and energy efficiency. And in terms of that, I was thinking of the battery storage side of it and things like that, because we're getting more and more applications in terms of that. And even if there's things in terms of the solar farms as well, that we should have in the policy context there. As you'll see in the next box down, these are the ones that may just need tweaking or changing or updating. So, for example, the strategic gap. Is there anywhere else within the borough that should have a similar sort of gap that we have between Bolesworth, Dordon and Tamworth? LP6 is listed here, additional employment land, but that's if the employment plan that we've just been through, it depends where that goes, whether that goes in the employment plan or whether that goes into the local plan review. But it does need changing because the policy at the moment is just very short, and what we've done is elongated it. So as you'll see there, there'll be some public policies like there's no suggested changes for LP10, which is for gypsy and travellers. Now that policy isn't to do anything with the numbers. It's saying, well, what are the things that you would consider if we had a gypsy and traveller planning application? So it's very site specific things, distances to nearest settlements and things like that. So as you'll see, there's 19 policies from the existing local plan that we're proposing not to change. There's 17 that we feel that require just minor changes, and 3 that perhaps require more fundamental changes. So what we propose in the next stage of this, if agreed, is that we will prepare an issues and options paper to go through all those that require a change, highlight those that we believe don't require a change, but alongside that, show a version of the local plan in track changes so that people can see and yourselves can see how that actually implicates it's an implication on that particular policy. Because sometimes when you don't see the whole, it's quite difficult to pick out what are the parts that you'd like to see. So for the next time, what we'd like to produce then, as I say, an issues and options paper and a track change local plan. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dot. Just on that, was we also, when we talked about the issues and options, we was also promised at some point that site allocation or the call for sites where it was yay, nay, and I know or I think it'd be quite useful to see that in one place where site X has been submitted and you've done the review and it's a yes or no, or it's, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't quite got to that stage. So even in the issues and options, I'm not sure that we'll be in a situation that we'll be able to say, we'd like to allocate site X and Y, but we don't want Z. I mean, we may be able to get to that point.
I think that'd be really useful. I think that'd be really useful
Okay, we'll
because
try
we
and
often
get to
have
that
questions,
point.
you know, we'll have questions as elected members. If someone submitted a site and they'll say, I'll submit the site, what's happened with it? And it will go, don't know. It'd be useful to be able to say, actually, we're considering it. We wouldn't necessarily, or actually it's not suitable for what we're looking for, something along those lines. And it's because we was promised this a couple of times. We've kind of been assured that we would get this a couple of times. Councillor Simpson, did you have your hand up first and then Councillor Hayfield?
Oh, I'm always ahead. If you'd like to go first, Councillor.
Thank you, Francis. In terms of green belt, a lot of us who represent green belt areas are obviously desperately concerned about what grey belt will be allowed to be developed. And Caroline will know, as I do, that there's people chomping at the bit to try and develop on the eastern side of Coleshill, down towards the Blythe. Green fields, build houses on them. I would rather see, personally, and I'm probably speaking for myself on this, I want to go first, so Councillor Simpson corrects me afterwards. I'd like to see more flexibility in the greenbelt areas. We've talked about small industrial units within farm building complexes that could help without changing the appearance of the greenbelt, provide industrial units. A large number of the smaller settlements within the Forlongley, Cawley and other areas are washed over by the greenbelt. They've got no development boundaries. Anything wants to build anything anywhere within those, or you can't, it's all greenbelt. You haven't got a development boundary. There might be an advantage in having some tightly drawn development boundaries within, added to some of those settlements, so that you could have a house here, small units here or something. That's my personal thought. I wait to be corrected.
It's always entertaining to hear Councillor Hayfield points, John. No, I don't necessarily disagree with you, surprisingly. But I do think
That
the
is
government has given us enough flexibility in terms of how to build on the green belt, given the grey belt. And I think a lot of what he's talking about, actually, grey belt allows for now. And we have other policies talking about, you know, rural housing sites which go to a point of that. But it's a review, so I'm not against reviewing. You know, that's the whole point of it. So, you know, I think there ought to be absolutely space for that. I have a fundamental question and then some comments on it. The first one is, does the Greenbelt review that is currently in process allow for consideration of extensions of the Greenbelt? Or is it simply looking at current boundaries and say, how do we have less of it?
There will be a section in the report that will cover about additional greenbelt.
Thank you, that's helpful. Qualified by, I'm not sure yet whether the area of restraint for greenbelt, given it's been amended by greybelt, is a safer designation.
Sorry, go back a stage, say that one again.
Which is better, areas of restraint or greenbelt, given that greenbelt, unless you're the first field out of the settlement, is greybelt?
That's an interesting question because as part of the work for the local plan review, we will be looking at gaps between other settlements. So we've got the gap between Poleswood, Dordon and Tamworth, but there's other gaps as well, potentially. At the southern end of the borough, you've got the extent of Arden Cross coming up, and then you've got Coleshill, so that's a gap. There's Coleshill to Birmingham, that's a gap. And then there's also between Brendan and Atherstone, even Grendon Baddesley in Dordon. So there's other places as well that are generally quite narrow in terms of potential gaps.
I'm only smiling, Joe, because I want to get in before Councillor Hayfield does and say, wow, sounds like the Coleshill Corridor to me, which we had for decades until we thought we were safe. So I'm genuinely happy that we're looking at that, because I know to an extent it's a play on words. The Greenbelt is now changed. It's not the Greenbelt policy we all thought we had. But what I would like to do is be imaginative with the words and see if there is more protection we can give to elements of the Greenbelt by using designations like area restraint, corridors, gaps, and all the rest of it. Now, the officer dealt with some of what I was going to say, aside from the Greenbelt review. I think we do need to consider areas of new policies as well. I think, you know, there are some things that the planning board has considered and would have been greatly assisted by a new policy in some areas. Solar farms and BESSSs are two clear examples. Another one could be the reuse of land which is safeguarded for the northern extension of HS2, which is not now going to happen, which we talked about in here in terms of employment land. I think there are other things where experience has shown over the last couple of years there is a desire for additional policies. Now, I'm not being dogmatic with it. If there are methods of tweaking existing policies to put those comments in rather than a specific new policy, I'm just as happy. But I think it's almost like we need our washing list of what are the things that we need to be sure recent experience has told us we need to focus on. Solar farms are a clear issue. I do think, in point of disagreement, I think we need to look at the whole of Gypsy and Travellers policies. So LP10, I would say, does require a review. Whether it will end up with a change or not, I don't know. But I think across the chamber, all sides, there is significant dissatisfaction with forms in respect of Gypsy and Travellers policy. And so to leave part of it and review part of it, I'd rather review the whole lot and come up with something that we can all ultimately say, yes, we are happy with or not happy with. I think a couple of things that are perhaps missing from the report is I'd like to see a clear time frame of how we are going to deliver this, when it will be delivered, and a clear understanding of what additional resource may or may not be required to enable us to hit that time frame. And I'd like, Chairman, for a workshop for any interested member, not just LDF or planning, but any interested member to come and talk about what the proposed changes are, because the sooner we start consulting with the rest of the council on where we're going with changes to the plan. And some of this, you know, we have relatively new and almost wholly new members of the authority who did not go through the pleasure of the last plan. So, you know, for me, I think my instinct is there are areas where we need new policies. There are other areas where, well, in Gypsy and Travellers, we do need to have a detailed review. I really would like to see a clear timescale and budget for what we need to achieve, because pace is critical. And if we don't get this done in time, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the authority may only have 2 years to live. So this can't take longer than 2 years. So we need to get on with it. And unless we have a measurable timescale and start to consult ourselves to begin with, I think we'll miss the target, even though I don't yet know what the target is.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with some of that, because I think that, you know, if we can look at the other policies, I mean, I was assured that the LP10 was a different policy from a Gypsy and Traveller. Was there a Gypsy and Traveller study that was done? I don't think I mentioned this previously, Doctor.
Yeah, there's a Gypsy and Traveller study that was done for this borough back in 2021, 22 maybe, and that we feel that that needs updating again. So it'd be part of the evidence base for the review of the policy. So,
And I think we should have that. I don't think you mentioned that leaders or.
If updating includes deleting some of it, yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I think certainly we should look at that gypsy and traveller study.
yeah, no problem. We'll move that up into the next slide above that. In terms of the time frame, a high level time frame was put into the local development scheme.
Yeah.
That's always available on our website. We're probably just behind the curve on that, but not far behind it in terms of what we were trying to achieve. But what we were looking for was to go out for issues and options in the autumn.
Yeah.
Then to develop a draft regulation 19 in order that that could go out for consultation as early in the new year as possible.
Yeah.
Because the aim is that we submit the plan to government as soon as we possibly can and well before the adopted local plan runs out, because that runs out on the 29th of September 2026.
Yeah.
And we really need to be at examination well before that date.
And I think if we can get the plan out for consultation early next year, we should have enough time to do that. I mean, that's like 8-9 months. So you would hope that we would have time.
It's amazing how many things happen on these that sort of try to slow us down, but yes, it should help us.
The incredulity here is only the number of times I've heard we should have chance to do it and we'll get it done in time. Councillor Oates will remember just as well as I do how many times last time we went through that. And okay, some of it was members' own issues that we sent it out for consultation a second time. But my concern is unless we have it set in blood and stone at the beginning of the agenda, reminding us what the time frame is and properly assessing what additional resource we need to deliver it. No point getting halfway through and saying we ain't got enough resource, we need more money, and then we have to wait another 2 months for executive to find the cash. I'd rather
Absolutely.
do that up front.
Absolutely. And as Doc's already said, we do have a plan. That plan is to go to consultation early next year. By early next year, just in my book, is January. That's what I class as early next year.
That's the issue.
So I think we should be aiming at those targets, but I do take on board your point. So with regard, Councillor Hayfield.
Just in terms of progressing things, picking up on what Mark was saying, I think it's really be helpful if in rather of bringing us something, rather than doing what you've done tonight, bring us something and say, we've looked at this is what we think, please sign this off. And we say, no, don't like it, take it away again. It would save time if there had been some discussion with members at an earlier stage. So you were testing the water to find out how members were going to react to this, so they got particular ideas, and then what you then send to us is far like just to say,
I do apologise. I probably misread the room quite considerably, but I didn't really think that there was anything too controversial here. And I truly learnt my lesson there, so I do apologise for that.
no, I'm just saying, speeding things up in the future,
Yeah, no problem at all.
having a discussion beforehand might be to our mutual benefit.
No, that's, yeah, it's understood.
So just to bring Councillor Lee, Councillor Simpson, you mentioned about a workshop for all members. Is that something we could look at? An
Yes,
opportunity for a workshop for all members to attend, should they wish to.
Yeah.
I know Councillor Simpson's always trying to get people more interested in planning. He's always kind of doing the hook. And I suspect that's part of that as well.
Yes,
So,
no
Councillor,
problem.
I'm never controversial and Doc can read me like a book. Deliverability of sites, the elephant in the room, the A5, pulling of the funding. Obviously H4 has had 31 delivered. I look at mine.
Yeah.
Our homes before the local plan was in place. The local plan obviously needs a master plan. There is an application in for a house bang slap in the middle of H4. There is no master plan. However, tonight I see that there is under there a master planning underway with council Trump Road highway improvements design underway, scheduled 26-27. So I was told there was no master plan and we hadn't sorted that, so can we perhaps have some information about the master plan and what that is, because that would obviously impact upon the application we've had in for the single housing H4.
There is a master plan that accompanied the neighbourhood plan, and that is what that refers to, because it is underway in terms of the background, but I suppose, yes, it's not being done now because of the in terms of the hiatus with the Trump Road. So it is in the background because as part of the neighbourhood plan, there was clearly the starting point of the master plan that is prepared locally. And it's that next stage of moving it on and then bringing it back to members to get approval before we go any further. But that point has been made, I think, to the applicant. So.
Good, thank you. Councillor Humphries.
Is there any relevance of at the time? The inspector said without the A5, our plan didn't work and we should have another look. Now we haven't got the A5. What happens to H4? Does the plan not work?
I think that's an interesting question in terms of.
Have you got an interesting answer?
Well, the interesting answer is that in a lot of other councils along the A5, where there's an application, a planning application, it seems to be that National Highways then has no objections. And that is a real concern for us because that's eating into the capacity that is there. But when somebody submits the planning application, it's that significance in terms of that extra traffic. And one of the appeals along the A5, the inspector actually said, well, a few more on top of a queue doesn't really make that much of a difference, does it? And that is what we're working within. Whereas at a local plan level, yeah, there are real stumbling blocks at junction 9 of the M42, the A5, the A446. But when you then deal with a planning application, it seems to be that the plan-led approach is sort of not considered.
Can I just add to that? I'm just think of the aquatic centre as you go down past the Longship there, or just towards the Longship Iron Lane. Their access into the aquatic centre, they put 29 houses there, and Highways have said can't use it because they won't let them have access. So there must be a problem with the A5 where Highways are concerned.
Yeah, that's because it doesn't comply with their need to have a proper access. There's safety issues and everything with that, so that's slightly different. And they went ahead and built the properties, and now they're looking at other solutions to actually access those, and that's actively underway.
Just to add to Dot's concerns, because it is utterly frustrating in the meeting we had, both in terms of local plans and appeals, where we have this disjointed approach from National Highways. It is a disjointed approach. We're reassured, yes, you will get the support if it's a strategic issue, but when it gets to a single site appeal, it's done on a very different basis. It's effectively what is the situation at this point in time, and everything else beyond the sort of 500-yard distance is irrelevant. It is utterly frustrating. Notwithstanding that, the local plan review gives us an opportunity to address the situation we're in. And one of those policies that we've been referred to, and I think councils have mentioned to the need for it, is that area of constraint, or what we call the old school strategic gap policy. Because as time progresses, we will be targeted. We will be open house, and of course, the A5 is the easiest and most direct area to target from less scrupulous or development colleagues in the private sector. So there is a need for speed in terms of training. Hopefully, this will give us an opportunity to at least give us some protection. It won't be 100%, but it will give us some protection. But we will be needing it in the near future. And that was just to reinforce concerns. We're aware of them, and yes, we will be trying to address them, but they are there.
Thank you.
I wanted to come back to something that Councillor Hayfield and Councillor Simpson has been touching on, is it really feels like, unfortunately, feels like we've looked at someone's homework in this and sort of picked it all apart. And then we've sort of almost proposed that we wanted to sort of work with a slightly more freer system to sort of collaborate. I've never encountered that with this council before, but would there be a way of Doc sort of sending things out to us that we could talk about in our groups, and you and I could communicate a little bit first and feedback, so that how you generate a document that's a bit more. It seems to me like we are generating a new policy almost, and it seems a bit unfair to end up doing it now. But it seems to be very non-political as well. I think we all seem to know where we sort of roughly want to go with it. Seems to be a simpler way of working for DOS. That's all that.
Yeah, and it's a really valid point. I mean, one of the interesting things is that if we were in a more IT advanced organisation, we would be doing all of this on SharePoint. We would be sharing all of these documents. We'd be collaborating with the documentation, etc. I know you love IT, Councillor Simpson. I know you love it. But that's kind of it. We're absolutely right. We'd do a much more collaborative approach on that. Fortunately, our current IT systems don't allow us to do that and don't support that. But certainly, I'm a firm believer no one of us is as good as all of us. And the more input we can have and the more support and collaboration we can have, the better the outcome. Councillor Simpson.
Chairman, I'm not claiming to have had
Oh, sorry. Caroline next, that's all.
Several people ago. Much of what I was going to comment on is I wanted to talk about the bit of restraint, whatever that might be called. The meaningful gap, whatever that is, that's obviously been rubbished over the previous years. So we're now going back to that. So we need to understand strategically where we want that to be and how big that can be, and what the big risk for me is one of the concerns people in my area have is where one area gets opened up and it opens up a whole swathe.
That's true.
And that is the concern. Isn't that people are anti all development? They're anti the concern that then just opens the door and you can't stop it. So that is really key to us. And timeframes are really important. And one thing I wanted to say most was, have you identified what resources required? Because that isn't easy to get, and that needs to happen really quickly. And if resource is what's required to achieve a timeframe that's really tight, then we need to make that possible. That's what we can do. That's what our role as a council is, and our role as committees. I'm not certain that collaborating on a document is really the role of this board necessarily, unless you want to take it to a task and finish.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the proper route for that actually exists within the structures we have. But I think that identifying what is needed to meet that timescale is the most salient thing, because actually we won't meet that. We won't be out for consultation in January if, as Dot's alluded to, things always get in the way. So what do we need to do? Do we need to put this meeting in more regularly? Do we need to make resource available? How do we make that money available? It's deemed to be one of our strategic priorities. Because actually that's really changed with the changes to the planning process that will change in an ever closer way, because that's coming what, January, February time? So Dot's already said we're behind the curve. So if we're behind the curve, how do we move that at pace and get ourselves ahead of that curve? And that's resource.
No, absolutely great. And what's the other members of the board's view? Should we create a task and finish group? Because task and finish groups are really good at getting things done in a specific timescale, because that's what they're set up to do. That's Simpson.
As I was going to say, Chairman, I'm not claiming to have had a good idea. In talking about the workshop, I was sort of going back to what we did for the last plan, where it was effectively the workshop the way I think we should do it. This board itself grew out of a task and finish group where we're looking at the plan. So, I think we can do it here, but I'm not fussed over form so long as we do it. And just to comment what I was going to say before on what Councillor Smith said, sometimes with planning it feels like I'm in the twilight zone. You know, we all believe in a plan-led system. The rest of the economy tends to work on either supply-led or demand-led. Demand-led always wins. You know, supply is guessing at what may be there, may not be there. And government doesn't work on supply. It says it does, but in the reality it doesn't. And the best example of that is we all thought we had a green belt. You then inject grey belt and with the best in the world. And any calculation on the impact on neighbouring properties, on transport needs, on educational needs, on the provision of healthcare, by saying build in the green belt, call it grey belt, you can build in it. We just did it, didn't we? And so, any suggestion that actually we really do live on a plan-led system, we don't. It's demand-led. And I think that there is an opportunity there. So, to Councillor Humphrey's point, the plan is the plan until it's proven not to be. It works until it absolutely falls over, and it falls over on the basis of not being able to make decisions and losing an appeal. And until we get to that point, the plan stays until we change it to another one.
Yeah, well, I think listening to I think we need this workshop. I think it'd be really good for us to come back together and we can invite other members to a workshop. And obviously, nice one to chair or something like that, because it'd be like herding cats. I guess if we invite too many, or had the full council or something like that. But I do want to keep up the pace. So with that in mind, just going back to the recommendation on agenda item 8, it talks about members support the policies recommended to be focused on the issues and options for the regulation 18. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think that's you sort of actually you should give perhaps some included, a more in-depth review of some of the other policies. But I am keen that we get an issues and options paper back to this board. And can we do that? Can we do the two in parallel?
Don't see why not, because as we're developing the issues and options paper, I think it would be good to sign that off with members to see if we're going in the right direction. But an options paper will have the range of options. It won't be a third way forward. I mean, there may, in certain instances, only really be one option.
And I think that's the appropriate way to do it. It's up to members to do that. I think what officers need to do is give us those options, because there will be other considerations that members will probably want to take to consider when making those decisions, and we need to come at that as a collective. So with regard to the recommendation, obviously point A, I don't think we were at a point, certainly point B. Did you want to reword point A?
That's what I was just going to suggest. Would it be helpful just to reword point A, just to include LP10? So that's definitely within the review. Or is it that you're saying that all of the other policies that we...
Councillor Simpson, you raised LP10 as a specific.
I think LP10 is important to get members behind the whole thing, because I think they won't otherwise. And I think it's a relatively quick but broad brush of what other policies might we need, particularly on BE, triple S and solar panels and HS2. Yes. But that was 30 seconds of thinking about it as I read the report. I can't honestly say I sat back and talked to colleagues or thought about what are the other areas, but I know as we go through our meetings on Friday, quite often we talk about, well, it'd be really good to have a policy on that.
Yeah.
So I think there is something that we need to.
So it's not just LP10; it's actually the introduction of other policies like renewables.
Yeah.
Could I just suggest though that LP10 is included within section A, but B, to consider at the next meeting an issues and options document through, and it doesn't need to say for consultation. It just to consider at the next meeting issues and options paper that would include the consideration of new policy areas.
Happy with that?
Councillor Hayfield, did you want to?
I don't want to lose any of Tommy's been something, the LP3, the green belt, we talked about looking at flexibilities within that or movement within that.
LP3 is already one that we consider will need
Okay, got it.
quite a lot of changes.
Okay,
So when we come to the
That-
issues and
happy with that.
options, you can make that point again if we haven't picked it up. But hopefully with the notes that we've made today, we should be able to.
I'm
pick
reassured,
that
Chair,
up.
thank you.
Thank you.
And three is almost, Chairman, to liaise with the chairman of resources and a handbag of plating. Sure we can.
And bag of plenty. Okay, so with those revised recommendations, are the board happy to propose? Happy to propose those revised recommendations, councillor Simpson, seconder. Owen Phillips, all those in favour? That's carried. So thank you, everybody. That's it for this evening. I think that's a lot. We've got no PNC, so thank you all for your time.